All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for showing up this morning to officially welcome back Kelly Kroskoff as President of Basketball Business Operations.
Nobody expected this. The woman sitting at the head of the whole organization, the president of the Indiana Fever, eventually said the silence part out loud. Her statements sparked the entire basketball music community in. Besides raising eyebrows, the true nature of that franchise's music, politics, pressure, locker room tensions, and the struggle between developing a champion and a brand were highlighted. And when you find out the whole tale, all you believe you know about Caitlin Clark's circumstances in Indiana has changed. Now, let us return to the beginning of this story, before Caitlin Clark ever. Indiana, wearing a Hoosier uniform, was one of the least well-known teams in professional basketball. There is speculation about 6 wins. 2021, 5 wins in 2022, and 13 wins in 2023. For nearly a decade, they were a joke, with no fans, buzz, or spotlight. No cameras would be present. The crowd was not packing the seats. The WNBA scenario had completely changed, regardless of the fervor. That was the fact. A once proud franchise had become an afterthought. However, no one in that front office could have predicted what happened, no matter how hard they tried. Things significantly changed when the first overall choice in the 2024 WNBA draft strolled into the room. Caitlin Clark did more than just reduce the temperature. She transformed the league as a whole. The crowds were all sold out. She delivered. There were record-breaking TV ratings, jerseys flying off the shelves, and a media frenzy never witnessed. In women's basketball previously, AA Music A.to be honest, never did I in the midst of that eruption the organization had to make. Would they ride the wave or try to steer it in a different direction? That's when the full story begins to get interesting, because the Fever required someone at the top who knew exactly what they had. A one-of-a-kind athlete who single-handedly transformed what was possible for women's sports. The front management made a move that surprised a lot of people. Their new president of business operations and basketball is Kelly Kroskoff. On paper, it made sense. Kroskoff had first-hand experience with the Fever, having assembled the winning team. The 2012 title. With all the expected fanfare, the squad introduced her. However, something in her initial news. The conference's rhetoric raised difficulties that many at the moment chose to ignore, but would come back months later. Because the warning signs were hidden in plain sight, nobody spotted them until it was too late. Too late. Everything broke down at this time. Caitlin Clark's absence due to an injury is a problem for July 2025. Clark has only played 11 games this season due to a groin injury that has been plaguing her for weeks. Fans are irritated. The squad is on the verge of qualifying for the playoffs. Pressure is building. Amidst all of that, the internet reveals something hidden in Kroskoff's October 2024 address that most people had completely ignored on the day that the tape from his first press conference mysteriously resurfaces on social media. During the press conference, Kroskoff stared straight at the cameras and remarked, "This is about the Indiana Fever. Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark are our key performers. We aim to continue developing them. However, I want this team to be a long-lasting brand, like Apple, and a national leader, similar to Apple." That was all that was needed. In just a few hours, the video became viral. Its fan base rose quickly because many people did not hear the vision in those words. It was a warning. Such a reaction was unprecedented in the Fever front office. Fans were not only angry, but also well-organized. The analogy with Apple struck a different chord because of what Apple did. Steve Jobs, one genius, built the framework for their whole identity. But as soon as he left, when the Fever president used that same example, the entire empire nearly crumbled. Clark supporters noticed something in it that appeared revealing, as if the organization already perceived Clark as an element rather than the major focus on social media. A fan replied to enduring companies that share their principles. Apple became a global icon thanks to Steve Jobs, the company's star and visionary, and another enthusiast. They didn't hold words, saying the Fever will realize that they lost the best opportunity in women's sports history when Clark ultimately thinks she's had enough of a front office skip-fire the message boards, comment sections, and responses all mirrored. Same fundamental sense. You do not belittle the most significant player this team has ever had, and you continue to pay attention to her. The criticism wasn't merely noise. It was a choice. And someone in that organization became aware of how serious. Kroskoff's entire account disappeared just a few hours after the video became viral. There was no statement or explanation where there had been a social media presence just a few days before. It gets substantially more challenging at this point because the front staff was being hammered online, the athletes on the court, the ones who truly dress up next to Caitlin Clark every night. We were giving an entirely different and far more realistic story. Lexi Hull, one of Clark's closest friends, did not hold anything when she applied for a Glamour magazine profile. Hull stated that everyone in the league was already aware that nearly no one wearing a Fever uniform had previously agreed to divulge. I believe there is some jealousy over the Fever because of the media coverage and the fans who have stood by us since Caitlin arrived. She went one step further and said that clubs from all over the league were chatting openly, discussing stuff like we can't let the Fever win in their own locker rooms. Hull's words revealed an uncomfortable the reality that had been emerging for 2 seasons. The Fever do more than just play basketball these days. Because of the players on their squad, opposition teams have singled them out every time they come onto the floor. And this is not due of the team's performance, but rather because of one individual. Sophie Cunningham went even farther. The player who made it plain early on that taking cheap comments at her teammate would have consequences, and she established herself. Clark's enforcer on the floor had already come forth to validate what the entire league had been speculating about. Cunningham said she heard it before I joined Indiana. She said there were explicit chats while she was still in Phoenix about Clark in the locker room, that competitors weren't just looking to win, they were attempting to gain their point across. Music throughout the season. The story of Clark being physically attacked and receiving an endless welcome to the W moment has been recounted. The physical play intended on Clark was so fierce. Objective observers were taken aback. And by the time her season ended after only 13 games due to a groin injury, many people were really doubting if the officiating had adequately safeguarded her. The response was no. According to a growing proportion of those paying careful attention, this was only the beginning. Because everything was happening in public, the inside story of what it's really like to be Caitlin Clark's coworker was beginning to emerge. It was also not what reviewers had expected. The story that Caitlin Clark's. The most common criticism was that she caused difficulties in the restroom and the players disliked her. Hall of Famer Cheryl Swoops observed, "No team could withstand the Fishers brought on by the fame and attention." On a podcast in September 2024, important members of the Fever were privately expressing their disinterest. The scenario around Clark was beyond their capacity. It spread quickly. It was either replayed everywhere. It became part of the background chatter as the Fever entered their 2nd season together. Unless, of course, Clark felt forced to appear as a guest on another March Madness show. Presented by Diana Taurasi Music and Subbard. She confronted it full-on. She was not upset. She did not act defensively. She was really cool about it. Essentially, you grow used to people believing they know what goes behind music. The co-workers who were there in the locker area also kept. Clark's teammates rallied around her as she recovered from her injuries during the 2025 playoffs. After the game, they broke off her interview. They showed up for her unexpectedly. When the Fever won the Commissioner Cup, there was genuine jubilation in the locker room, laughing and sincerely glad for one another. Players interacted in a way that did not appear to be an act. This is what the media has failed to capture. The Fever narrative was never about whether Caitlin Clark's colleagues liked her, but rather whether the front, the office, which oversaw them all, was prepared to surround her with the required components and dedicate all of their attention. The project. The difference was that Boston had a tight relationship with Clark because the links were real. On the court, Aaliyah, Lexi Hull, was cautious. Sophie Cunningham and other new players gushed over Clark. Before they had played a game together, Michaela Timpson, the rookie who made the final roster, exhibited true regard for Clark in a level that is difficult to replicate. Following the expansion draft, Clark published comments on Instagram for two of her colleagues, saying things like, "Cub, I love you" for Christy Wallace and "My Aussie for life" for Chloe BBY. The affection was genuine. These were actual relationships. However, contacts alone are insufficient to win titles. And that was the tension at the center of it all. Not simply the Apple soundbite, but the whole of Kelly Kroskoff's comments from the October 2024 press conference contained something that many people overlooked in there. Hurry to voice their disapproval when Krokoff responded that she wanted the Fever to be long-lasting. Brand, she was talking about the long game. Caitlin Clark was 10 when Indiana earned its only title. In 2012, she remarked, adding that it sometimes takes a generation to reach the next level. Perhaps the group had been working for someone else all along, setting the seeds for a 10-year-old someplace who will be inspired by what the Fever was doing at the time. Whether you view this as vision or deception depends on how you perceived the front office's genuine priorities. But this is indisputable. Fans who visited the Fever starting in 2024, they did not show up because of a brand, but because of a player. They drove for hours on end,